So I've been spending the last week in the V-berth moving around a whole bunch of our plumbing. Ever since everything froze a couple of weeks ago, we've been reconsidering and replanning how our plumbing works on board and how it's all laid out. It's been sort of pieced together over the years, but now that most of the systems we have are gonna stay and we've upgraded and replumbed most of them, it was time to sort of do one final iteration, and that was to move all of our pumps and our fuses and filters into one location. So it's much easier to manage, much easier to maintain, and it's just simple and clean and well organized. And from there, all of the plumbing, all the pipes run out to each sink and toilet and everything else. So I've just finished moving all of our pumps into this storage behind me, which is where our old hot water tank used to be. But that was a cheap home hot water tank that never really worked quite as well as we were hoping it would. We actually ended up melting the thermostat in the Netherlands, and we've been trying to order a new one, but it turns out it wasn't meant for 48 volts, and the whole thing has been kind of a nightmare. So we've also picked up a new marine hot water tank, and definitely a bit more pricey than our DIY system, but electricity and water should never mix, and the fact that the old one was melting and we're having a hard time managing the electrical side of it just made us feel really uncomfortable. So we've now got a marine unit. It's all sealed, everything is separated, so it should be good to go. I've put it in the Ford locker, and next thing I need to do is crawl in there and finish plumbing the other side of it. But first I'll give you a little tour of the pumps that I've put in here. All right, so this over here is our saltwater washdown pump. It's a Parmex 4, I think, and it works pretty well. Designated solely for our saltwater deck wash and our anchor chain wash. And then this pump here is our old Sensor Max that we used for our freshwater system, but the sensor in it never really shut off, so it would always click on and off, which is a bit annoying. But now we're using it for our head pump because it's very quiet and it has a variable RPM. So when that toilet flushes, it's nice and quiet and it doesn't sound like a jet fighter taking off. And all of our fuses for all the pumps and the bilge pumps are right here, run from a main line back to the breaker. And then this is our new freshwater pump, this little one that we picked up, and it works pretty well. It's a little bit louder. It doesn't control its speed quite as well as the old one, but it definitely shuts off when we're done using it, which is great. So when the fresh water comes in, goes through this pump and then into a carbon filter so that our tank water tastes good. And then it goes through to the hot water tank, which is plumbed behind this bulkhead. And then the hot water comes out back through this thermostat so that we can control the temperature to the taps so we don't burn ourselves. Now that it's all plumbed in there, it's nice and easy and well organized. Just have a little bit more cable management to take care of. So that's it. That's our new plumbing cubby. Now I just need to crawl into the forward locker, which means moving this mattress a bit more, and just make the final connections to the hot water tank. And then once I run the electrical for it, we should have hot water again. I've just finished plumbing the new hot water tank into this side of our V-berth storage, and most of the pumps and filters and everything are plumbed on that side. But I need to get out of here. Sort of built myself in.
Can you get out?
It's a tight fit in here. Hopefully I never have to crawl back in there again. Oh.
Almost there.
My feet are asleep. Or maybe they're cold. I can't tell.
You made it.
I'm alive. I've been in this V-berth for like a week. Well, I just installed the two little switches so we can control hot and cold water at the galley. And now I have to crawl in, do some boat yoga, and wire the solenoid switches so that they can Same solenoid switches that we have in the shower actually that control hot and cold. I'm wiring those in behind the sink so that we can control hot and cold water from here. That was a mistake. Oh. Yeah, baby. Yeah. Ooh. Well, it's been about an hour since we turned the hot water tank on, and it's definitely, yeah, we've got hot water in the galley. Oh, that's so nice. No more boiling water to wash dishes. Well, at least when we're at a marina. And we have it set to about 42 degrees Celsius, so we can open up the hot water entirely and it doesn't actually like burn our hands. It's just the right temperature to wash dishes or shower. But the water in the tank is significantly hotter.
How long does it take before it becomes hot?
So the element that came with that particular hot water tank, I think is only 500 watts. So it takes about 3 hours for it to heat up to temperature. We might replace it with the 1.2 kilowatt version so it heats up quite a bit quicker. But overall, I'm pretty happy. We finally have hot water in the galley after what, 7 years? It's turned in from a luxury to kind of a necessity up here in Norway, because the water that comes in from our tanks is about 1 degree above freezing because the water temperature outside is so cold. So it's almost painful to like wash your hands and wash your face and stuff. So it's really nice to just be able to push a button and have hot water in the galley now. It might not be something we can run out on anchor. Hot water definitely uses quite a bit of electricity to heat up, but it's going to be really nice to pull into some of these marinas this spring and summer and not have to worry if there's showers on land or if the water's frozen or if they're open. We can just plug in and be able to get hot water now. So that's really nice. I'm excited to take a hot shower. Well, as nice as having hot water in the galley and to shower is, the water outside is still frozen and we're still hauling it by jugs. And we're realizing more and more that this isn't going to be a temporary issue. It's probably going to be an issue throughout the rest of the spring, and also an issue in a lot of places we're planning to sail this summer. We've been pretty lucky here in Norway that there are so many little docks and little marinas everywhere that finding water and electricity hasn't really been too much of an issue. But this summer we're planning to go to much more remote places where fresh water is definitely going to be an issue to find. So it's finally time to bite the bullet and install a water maker on board. It's something we've been planning for a very long time since we got the boat. We've never really had the need for one since water has always been pretty easy to find, and we've also never really had the means before because water makers are expensive. So we've spent the last couple of years talking with all of our friends on boats who have water makers, doing our own research, and learning more about how they work and the differences between all of them. And they all basically boil down into two different types. One that uses a high pressure pump to push salt water through a membrane, and one that uses a pressure recovery pump to push high pressure salt water through the membrane and separate out the salt water so that you can drink the fresh water that comes out the other side. The types that use a basic high pressure pump, like what you'd find in a pressure washer, are quite a bit less expensive, and you can also build them yourself. You can buy most of the components you need. For a long time we thought we were going to be building our own because you can save quite a bit of money doing so, and they're pretty simple systems. As long as you can get salt water up to about 800 psi and push it through a membrane, the rest is just plumbing and diverter valves and salinity probes and things. And there's actually companies that sell pretty good kits for the sort of DIY water maker, but all of the systems that use a single source high pressure pump require way too much power for us to run. Most of them require at least a generator to run because the pressure pumps alone are usually upwards of 1 to 1.5 kilowatts. And that's just not something that we can maintain on our electric boat. What we can't afford is the power draw that those run. And we can't drain our entire battery bank every time we want to fill up our water tanks. So for us, as much as we'd want to build our own, and we'd love to save a few $1,000s doing so, we wouldn't be able to run it once it was on board anyway. So to us, a water maker with a pressure recovery pump was really the only way to go. And there's only 1 or 2 manufacturers that make them, and they're pretty expensive. So we've been saving up for the past couple of years to get one. And now that all the water's frozen in Norway, it's time to finally get one installed, which is going to be pretty amazing to have fresh water on board with a push of a button. So while we wait for them to put it together and mail it over to us, we're going to finish modifying the space that's going to be installed, measure everything, make sure everything's good to go for when it gets here, because that's pretty much the last major project before we can start sailing again. So we want it to go as smoothly as possible. Well, it looks like our water maker will be arriving later this week. So before it gets here, I'm going to be modifying the storage space underneath this sort of pilot berth area, because that's where we're going to be installing it, or at least components of it. And right now it only has an access hatch about that big. So the first thing I need to do is remove all my tools, but then cut and build a much larger access so that we can actually get the thing in there and also be able to maintain it and service it when we need to in the future.
The knife goes in easy, but the blood stains your kitchen sink. Even I don't believe me when I say I see you in everything. Would that be without you? Would that be?
Well, it turns out that this bulkhead, the second major bulkhead in our boat, this section also isn't glass to the hull. We've been systematically going through and discovering places where they just didn't bother fiberglassing these bulkheads to the hull. So I'm going to be grinding out some of the old paint and fiberglassing that back in before we finish this project. It's another reason where there's a file sanders or finger sanders are super, super useful. Some 80 grit sandpaper on there and a vacuum cleaner. They don't throw a really fine dust. They throw big chunks, and then the vacuum cleaner sucks those up. So it's a really good and clean way to keep fiberglass dust out of our boat. We don't need to plastic off and like mask everything off because there's just no dust in the air. Although down in there there's dust, so I'm masking up. Alright, the bulkhead is finally glassed in properly. We still have a couple more bulkheads to do on the boat, but at least that one's good. So we'll let the epoxy cure overnight, and then tomorrow I'll paint it. But the water outside is almost at freezing. It's about 2 degrees Celsius, so we've got heaters running in here because the epoxy's turned into like toothpaste because it's so cold. Hopefully that'll work.
Yeah, it's interesting the difference between doing project in Guatemala and doing projects here, right?
Even in the UK, our we had heaters running, but it was still like 10 degrees Celsius, and now it's minus 10 outside. So we've never had to do fiberglass work when it's this cold before. It'd be interesting. Put all of our heaters in there tonight. All right, good enough. cold outside. The thing is, theoretically, if I cut it in half, it'll lose a little bit of its structural integrity. Maybe I don't cut it in half. I'll probably do without it.
Take off my pants.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, I am.
Wouldn't want to get your pants dirty.
Ta-da!
How many layers of pants do you have on?
3. Hey, it's minus 17 degrees outside. We probably will need to do 2.
Let me see your fancy artist brush. You said you wanted to paint today.
Right? No, some sections, I mean, the big brush is just too big without making a mess, so I'm borrowing some of my art brushes to paint the boat.
How long has that piece of wood been unpainted?
When did we put this on?
Just cats.
Yeah, so almost 3 years.
Boat projects.
Boat projects.
I've built a little lovely chipboard model from good old architecture school of the dimensions of the water maker so that I can test fit everything. It's gonna be a really tight fit, but I think we've got pretty accurate dimensions, and this model might not look like much, but it's all the important dimensions of the base, the height, and how far all the pipes and stuff stick off the end. So that fits down on our little shelf here. It's a tight fit, but it should work. I've got the Sikaflex warming up in there as well because I'm going to glue all this down today and then paint it. So it should fit when it comes down in here just perfectly. We'll probably only have about half of a centimeter of clear space, so it's going to be a tight fit. It's like this is going to be a little bit higher because it's on rubber mounts, so it should be okay, but it's going to be a tight fit. Well, all the prep work is as done as it can be. Now we're just waiting for our water maker to arrive. Tracking says it's in Oslo, which means it should be here in a couple of days, but it's going into the weekend, so it might not be here till Monday. So I think we'll end it there, and we'll be installing it next week. And the video will be coming out, and we'll be going into all the details of why we chose the water maker we did and the install. So until then, cheers.